Earth Day. This panel is hosted by the Center for Sustainable Development at the College of Charleston as a part of its Earth Month programming, and is the final event for our 2020-2021 year-long theme of global warming and climate change. We appreciate you being here with us as we have this discussion. Our faculty panel and discussion today will focus on the need for an understanding of resilience across the triple bottom line, which is social, economic, and environmental systems of sustainability within the context of rapid and human-induced climate change. Given predicted sea level rise, more extreme hurricanes and intense rain events, extremely hot days, and the shifting ocean currents, how will Charlestonians and people living in the Low Country create resilient climate just systems in the coming decades? This is a question that we'll be thinking about. What infrastructure will have to be created, and how will it be paid for? And how will Charleston adapt to a warmer planet along with everyone else also having to adapt at the same time? How can the political will that we need be developed to tackle this wicked problem that faces us all today? Today, we're going to hear from people working on this issue from a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds from our top 3 local institutions. It's very exciting to be able to bring these 3 institutions together today for this discussion. We're going to be hearing from the College of Charleston as the host of the event, MUSC, or the Medical University of South Carolina, and the Citadel. We've organized today's event, as you can see on the screen. We've organized it into 3 clusters of presentations, where we will be hearing from one person from each institution at a time, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So we would like to make sure that we have time to engage with our audience today. So we'll have moderated Q&A at the end of each panel group before moving to the next cluster of the 3. In the interest of time and just efficiency, we would ask that you please put your questions for the panelists in the chat, and we will ask them on your behalf. That way we can stay muted, and certainly we can open up for discussion if it's necessary, but it's helpful if you put the questions in the chat ahead of time so that we know to ask them. So we're going to go ahead and start with our first panel. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment and invite Dr. Pierce to go ahead and pull up his slides. Wonderful. And for those of you who have not spent the entire year and a half every day in Zoom, if you go up to the right-hand side of your screen, there's a side-by-side speaker option, which allows you to see both the slides and our current speaker. That's a nice way to be able to do both. So our first panelist is Dr. John Pierce, who is an assistant professor at the Professor of Environmental Health and the leader of the Air Quality Lab at MUSC. His current research focuses on developing approaches to better understand and assess complex environmental exposures. He has served as principal investigator for grants awarded by the NIH and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and is currently the OIF grantee supported by the NIH-sponsored Environmental Influences on Child Health Outcomes Program, or ECHO. Dr. Pierce has published work on exposure monitoring, modeling, and the characterization, and his long-term research goal is to pioneer methodologies that will lead to breakthroughs in the understanding of links between complex environmental exposure and human health. He holds a PhD in geography and environmental sciences from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, and completed his postdoctoral training in environmental biostatistics at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Is conducting research with the Southeastern Center for Air Pollution Epidemiology, a US EPA Clean Air Research Center. Dr. Pierce, please take it away.
All right, Jim, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I should also note that I'm the instructor here for Principles of Environmental Health here as part of our graduate program here at MUSC in the Department of Public Health Sciences. And one of the topics we often discuss in our environmental health course is climate and changing climate. And at the end of the day, students are oftentimes, really interested in, why is climate change an important driver are an important aspect of public health. And that's really what I'm kind of hoping to kind of paint the picture for today with my quick presentation. So as Jim noted, there are lots of environmental changes that are currently ongoing across the globe, across the continental US, and even within our own communities. So we're seeing increases in environmental risk factors such as temperature, flooding, extreme events such as hurricanes, droughts, etc. We are seeing lots of environmental changes that are stemming from large-scale changes in climate. So why are we concerned about these changes in the context of human health? Well, in short, the environment has been shown to be a very, very strong determinant of health. So global studies by the World Health Organization have identified about 85 categories of disease and injury that are linked to environmental risk factors. They've attributed almost 25% of global disease to preventable environmental exposures. And importantly, about 33% of the diseases experienced by children are attributed to environmental risk factors or environmental exposures. So in short, the environment is a very strong or major determinant of health at the population and individual level. Some major diseases related to the environment include things like gastrointestinal disorders such as diarrhea, respiratory infections, infectious diseases such as malaria, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Climate and weather can directly or indirectly influence health by ultimately governing environmental conditions. So one common example is temperature. Right, so we all know that one of the primary results of a changing climate are changes in temperature. And so this has sparked a lot of interest by environmental epidemiologists to really kind of look at, well, how does changes in temperature actually influence population health? And so we do this by conducting large-scale population or ecological studies where we ultimately look at changes in temperature over a geographic region and monitor or measure the association with an outcome of interest. And so what you will see here by the three-dimensional plot on the left is a large-scale study looking at the population of Melbourne, Australia. And here we're looking at changes in 3-day average temperatures in relation to mortality. And ultimately what we see where that changes in daily temperatures, particularly increases, were most strongly associated with increases in deaths. That's where we saw our peaks. We're at our highest daily average temperatures. And then in addition to that, another way we looked at temperature was through temperature trajectories. So how were temperatures changing over time? And very quickly, what we found here was that the combination of very stable temperatures that were high, what we would basically describe as a heat wave, were most strongly associated with mortality in Melbourne, Australia. And so this was a large-scale study looking at about 15 years of data. We also know that the linkage between temperature can also influence a variety of other environmental risk factors. And so the plot here on the right essentially shows the relationship between daily maximum temperature and ambient air pollution concentrations of PM10. And so essentially what happens here, as daily maximum temperatures increase, we see an increase in secondary particle formation through chemical processes in the atmosphere and interactions with radiation. And so we get increases in particle levels that are linked or driven by temperature. So this is two ways in which temperature can influence population health directly through influences in mortality, and indirectly by increasing potential exposures to another environmental risk factor, such as air pollution. Right, so temperature is very important as a determinant of population health. So we know, unfortunately, that the climate projections are showing that these trends will continue. For example, we're expecting to see increases in the number of hot days per year, as well as increases in moisture and certain locations around the country. And so we know, again, that temperature and humidity can be associated with health. In South Carolina, more specifically, we've seen that South Carolina has been changing. And so over the last century, we've seen increases in about 1 to 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature. In 70 years, it's predicted that about 95-degree Fahrenheit days will increase to about 30 to 60 days per year, as compared to about 15 days that we experience today. We will also, as projected, will experience increases in heavy participation events. Such as major storms will increase by about 27%. And we know that sea level has risen a few inches every decade over the last 80 years as measured within the Charleston Harbor. So we know that these environmental changes are occurring. And we know that these environmental risk factors do influence health. So this is why, as public health scientists, we are ultimately so concerned about climate change. Again, here's just a quick illustration of rising sea level conditions as measured in the Charleston Harbor. We do know that projections estimate a broad range of scenarios occurring here locally, really depending on the types of mitigation that we implement in terms of CO2 control. And so we do have a kind of a broad range of projected sea level rise based on these numbers. But at the end of the day, what we are seeing across all of these are increasing sea levels. So we know that that can potentially increase local events such as flooding. And so here is a quick mapping from the risk zone map from Climate Central. And here is an illustration of what a 4-foot sea level rise would likely do here locally. And so, we know that we already experience several nuisance flooding events per year. This is what the local geography would look like under a 4-foot sea level rise. Okay, so again, kind of the question being asked by public health scientists is, well, how do these changes ultimately lead to impacts on population or public health? And at the end of the day, they ultimately influence the types and frequency of environmental exposures that populations experience. So for example, changes in climate and weather do influence temperature extremes. They influence the frequency of severe storms and flooding. They influence the frequency of heavy participation, vector-borne disease, air pollution, and water pollution events. So climate and weather are strongly linked to many of these environmental risk factors because these risk factors ultimately reside within these atmospheric or aquatic systems. So the changes governed by climate will ultimately lead to changes in the exposure potential to some of these harmful risk factors. And that we know is a critical component of risk. You must have the exposure before you have the adverse event. So here is a quick look at how temperature changes may influence mortality under climate change scenarios. And essentially what we do as environmental epidemiologists is we take existing relationships and we modify those exposures based on climate projections, and then we estimate what we identify as excess risk. And we attribute that to a climate penalty in our risk factor. And so very quickly, what we see here on the right are illustrations showing how increasing temperatures will influence mortality as temperatures rise. As I mentioned previously, climate change can also indirectly influence environmental events. So for example, the frequency of forest fires can have significant impacts on local air quality. So for example, here a few years ago in the Southeast, we had wildfires break out in North Carolina and North Georgia. And here is air monitoring data, actually here from MUSC campus. And so what we saw on those days were significant increases in particles here at the local level, from those large regional episodes. So increases in the frequency of those types of events could degrade air quality at the local level and regional level. So at the end of the day, the impacts of climate change on human health are broad and significant. They can influence a variety of different environmental risk factors through their ability to govern basically climate and weather and atmospheric systems. And these risk factors are strong determinants of a variety of different health outcomes. Extreme temperatures and sea level rise and severe storms present major local concerns. Unfortunately, environmental health risk will likely increase due to changes in climate in the future. Okay, well, I know we were supposed to be fairly quick today, so that was my quick overview, kind of painting the picture as why climate change is an important driver of human health and public health.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Pierce. And for those of you who are just joining us, if you have, remember we're going to have clusters of 3 panelists and then time for Q&A. So please don't hesitate to put some questions in the chat for Dr. Pierce that we can get to here momentarily. But in the meantime, our next presenter is from the Citadel, Dr. Mustafa Batouli. If you want to go ahead and share your slides. Dr. Batuli is the Assistant Professor of Construction Engineering in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the Citadel. He received his PhD in civil engineering from Florida International University. He holds a Master in Public Administration and a graduate certificate in Homeland Security and Emergency Management from FIU, a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering, Construction Engineering and Management from IAU, and a BS in Civil Engineering and Surveying from the University of Tehran. Dr. Batuli holds Project Manager Professional International Certificate. Prior to joining the Citadel, he was a visiting professor of construction management at the Musc School of Construction, Infrastructure, and Sustainability at FIU. He teaches a diverse range of courses in civil engineering, and construction project management. And as a teacher, he aims to do what we should all be doing, inspiring his students to think intensively and critically and to live ethically and morally. Dr. Batuli's major area of research is system of systems analysis of sustainability and resilience in civil infrastructure. He's particularly interested in studying the human infrastructure environment interactions. Currently, he's working on research projects sponsored by the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium and the Citadel Center for Climate Studies, which are respectively focused on the impacts of sea level rise on social inequity and the decision-making behaviors of coastal communities during natural disasters. And please take it away.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here on this beautiful Earth Day. Before I start, I want to acknowledge 2 organizations that support my research. One, as Dr. Wright mentioned, is the Sea Grant Consortium, and the other is our own Center for Climate Studies at the Citadel. Sea level rise creates a plethora of challenges for coastal communities. Most of us have been affected by occasional coastal flooding, which we call nuisance flooding, or sometimes we call it even sunny day flooding, which happens in a sunny day just because of high tide due to sea level rise. In extreme cases, these nuisance flooding can result in permanent inundation of lands. A good example of that is the country of Maldives, country in Southeast Asia, which is projected to sink within the next few decades. So a whole country will be wiped out of the map within a few decades. Other challenges created by sea level rise include the intrusion of salt water into freshwater aquifers and reservoirs. And there is an ongoing discussion about how sea level rise increases the frequency and intensity of hurricanes and storm surges in coastal communities. So these sea level rise stressors affect our infrastructure systems. For example, the flooding of wastewater treatment plants may release untreated wastewater into nearby rivers or freshwater systems. Also rising groundwater tables may cause sewage backup, and intrusion of salt water may accelerate corrosion of underground utilities and drinking water pipes. Sea level rise also affects energy infrastructure in both direct and indirect ways. And these indirect impacts here are particularly important because they highlight the interdependency among different infrastructure systems. For example, one common method to handle coastal flooding is to pump out the water from critical infrastructure. But these large pumps that are now being installed, including close to our campus and closer to the MUSC campus, these are also sometimes combined with desalination technology. These are very energy intensive and put a lot of pressure on the power systems. Sea level rise also affects the transportation infrastructure. The very well-known impact is just flooding of roads and bridges, but accelerated deterioration of pavement and coastal roads are among other impacts of sea level rise on transportation infrastructure. On the other hand, in addition to the infrastructure impacts, sea level rise also has significant socioeconomic impacts. It is now well documented that sea level rise causes a population displacement, and a phenomenon known as climate refugees has become very frequently happens now in many parts of the world. Other socioeconomic impacts of sea level rise include loss of the GDP in coastal regions, partially because a major driver of economy in coastal regions is tourism, and tourism is being affected by sea level rise. Other socioeconomic impacts that affect families and households is property losses and sometimes even casualties due to sea level rise. So, given the disastrous threats of the sea level rise, the government intervenes to alleviate the impacts on coastal communities. These government interventions typically happen in two ways. First is through direct support for at-risk or affected individuals and households. A prominent example for this type of intervention is the FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program and the Individuals and Households Program. On the other hand, state and local agencies such as state DOTs, cities, municipalities, they make significant capital investment on infrastructure adaptation projects such as building seawalls, installing pump stations, and even raising elevations of facilities. So one research study that I conducted a few years back was on the city of Miami Beach, and they are technically raising the entire city of Miami Beach by 2 feet, which is just thinking about the amount of excavation, the amount of soil transportation that needs to be done for this. It's just millions or even billions of dollars within a few decades. So now, one issue with this type of the government intervention is that in real world, the infrastructure impacts accelerate or make the socioeconomic impacts worse. But the two initiatives that the government has, the infrastructure adaptation and the disaster support, mostly work independently. And this disconnect between the infrastructure adaptation and disaster support creates a variety of issues. For example, the support that FEMA provides or other government agencies provide with the disaster relief policies make it more likely for the flood-prone properties to be occupied by the people who are most at risk, which exacerbates the vicious cycle of socioeconomic disadvantage and socioeconomic impact. So the whole idea of the government, the FEMA helping people is to reduce the vulnerability, but it actually makes people who are most vulnerable to continue to live and develop in areas that are going to be more and more affected. For example, flood-prone properties are more likely to be offered for rent at a discount because they are flood-prone properties, which in turn attracts lower income groups, seniors, and infirm groups. Now, because these groups are already at a socioeconomic disadvantage, they are less resilient to sea level rise and feel the impact of sea level rise more severely. Now, after each event, they become more and more vulnerable to the next hazard caused by sea level rise, which just escalates demand for aid. So, and that's a thing that has been happening in the past few decades, particularly after the Katrina hurricane. So there is more and more a growing demand for disaster support help. Now, what I'm suggesting in the research studies that we are conducting now is we need to integrate the sea level rise resilience with the adaptation projects and disaster support. So when we think about building new seawalls or investing on pump stations or any capital investment that we are doing on our infrastructure, we need to think about how those investments affect the vulnerable communities so that in future, we won't need to invest more and more on the disaster support. So the whole idea that I'm pursuing is to integrating sea level rise resilience with smart investment on infrastructure systems rather than direct payments or disaster support to families and households. So I just wanted to share the high level idea of my research with you. I know we are short on time, so I stop here and I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. There's already some questions streaming in through the chat, so we'll get to those in a moment. But first, we're going to hear from our third panelist of this cluster, Dr. Barry Stiefel from the College of Charleston, who is an associate professor, and Barry, feel free to share your slides, in the Historic Preservation and Community Planning program at the college, which is part of the Department of Art and Architectural History. He is interested in how the sum of how local preservation efforts affect regional, national, and multinational policies within the field of cultural resource management and national heritage conservation. Dr. Stiefel has published numerous books, I think it's like 9 or something, and articles including Sustainable Heritage, Merging Environmental Conservation and Historic Preservation, published by Routledge Press in 2018. And Barry, please take it away.
Hello, I'm Barry Stiefel. Thank you for having me here today. My talk is about resilience in the 11th and 31st centuries, as well as the 21st. Because if resilience is about communities like Charleston and being able to sustain themselves in the present, then we should be as much interested in the 11th and 31st centuries as we are today. After all, it's only a matter of time before the present becomes the future. And we can learn much about past trajectories regarding ideas for future directions. As a preservationist with a background in urban planning and environmental planning, my research and teaching approach has one metaphorical foot in the past in order to understand how we got to where we are. My other metaphorical foot is in the present with the purpose of ascertaining what the current situation is, particularly with an interest in social and environmental problems that are in need of addressment. With this metaphorical foundation, my aim is to look to the future regarding where our communities should be for enhanced quality of life for all. For inspiration on considerations for resilience planning, I look to what was inherited from the past in the present in order to consider what models communities might consider for the future regarding the capacity to recover from difficult life events, the definition of resilience. Where I look to inspiration for resilience in the 21st century, I ask myself the question, what other places are already resilient? This question is difficult to answer because in the present, there are challenges articulating exactly what this is. A model of approach I used was, well, what are the oldest places continuously inhabited by people, and what can we learn from them in these places? So I looked at a number of places. Among those that stood out that I wanted to share were the following. First one is Taos Pueblo. It's more than 1,000 years old in a very arid climate. And what we see here is a very important community stewardship of place. I also want to show another one, and that is this one here, Rokensdam Farmhouse in Kirigibor, Fierro Islands. It is also more than 1,000 years old in a temperate climate with a community stewardship of place. In both instances, the buildings are low barrier for people to take care of. Materials come from the local environments. When materials are used, they easily return to the local environments as part of a continuous feedback loop. In other words, the places that people build and inhabit are also part of the ecosystem. Another example I wanted to give is looking at Shabam in Yemen. Well, now nearly as old as Taos and Rostaban, it's only 400 years old. Shabam in Yemen demonstrates that medium to high-rise urban densities for resilient design communities is possible, even in arid places that are more similar to the American Southwest. And there's a lot that can be learned from this situation. And then another one that intrigued me a lot was the Fugo rice terraces in the Philippines, which have been cultivated continuously for more than 500 years. It's an intriguing demonstration of resilient and sustainable agriculture that's also integrated with local ecological systems and human cultural lifeways. One cannot farm the same land for 500 continuous centuries if they don't understand nutrient cycles. But also within this, same philosophical approach. I'm gonna share another screen with you, just a second. Is this here. At other early manifestations of modern style living, particularly transportation by motor vehicle. This is the earliest that was ever built, the Cougar Car, built in France in 1769, which is steam powered. It is a life-size replica demonstrating in how it worked. This was the first vehicle ever designed and built by humans that did not use draft animal, wind, water, or gravity, predating locomotives and steamships by a couple of decades. Besides being incredibly unresilient regarding its coal-burning power, slow speed, large size, etc., the 250-year-old automobile looks utterly ridiculous. Yet in 1769, the Cougar Car was the most technologically advanced vehicle there was. While our most advanced advanced vehicles today look like this ridiculous 100 years from now, let alone 1,000. So lastly, what will resilience look like in 3021? Because in order to get to this point, we have to first make it through the 21st century. Perhaps the future isn't so very science fiction as people have dreamt over multiple generations. And here's a few examples. Here in the lower left, I have an image of what the city of the future might look like as proposed today. And then over to the right, this is what the cities of the future that were proposed about 110 years ago, shortly after the proliferation of the automobile and the airplane. And this, of course, is looking at what they thought New York would look like 110 years from then. And this is in comparison to a place like Taos Pueblo, what it looks like today on the left, versus over on the right, where it has been very resilient in terms of providing habitation for the people that live there. Though there's been slight modifications, as people do live there over the time, there is change. Those are things that are also addressed as well. And that is, might the resilient 31st century look reminiscent of what we already have known to be resilient previously? Within Charleston, this will mean living in harmony with water and a warm climate, where humans are an integrated part of ecological cycles. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we do have, we are tight on time, but we do have a little bit of time for questions, and we have a couple questions in the chat. Please don't hesitate to continue to put them in there. The first one is for Dr. Batuli. Anyone else on the first panel, how do you see Charleston navigating in the years to come the current need of tourism to drive the local economy, with those tourists arriving in Charleston in modes that are almost entirely dependent on fossil fuels, thus accelerating climate change, and realizing that it is not a viable long-term strategy for running an economy given climate change, or for dealing with climate change and sea level rise that's impacting people locally?
Very good. That's a great question. So it's partially related to my research, partially out of the scope of what I do. But my answer to that question is there are two actions that our society in general can do in terms of the climate change. One is the mitigation effort that only happens at the federal, even not federal, I believe mostly happens at the international level. Because if you are thinking about like reducing fossil fuel, that needs to be done in the entire Earth, and to reduce the accelerated trend of like carbon dioxide emissions and increasing global temperature, sea level rise. So that is a mitigation path, which is totally, I believe, mostly out of control of cities. Not that cities or local municipalities cannot play a role in the big picture, but they are just a small piece of a global effort to mitigate the climate change. But another story is adaptation, accepting that some changes are coming and we need to be prepared for the changes that are coming. Some of them are already here. That's a type of decision that happens at the local level more than the global and international level. Of course, like federal government also plays a role in that, but if I want to just shortly answer this question is what we as a local community can do is to look at the different scenarios, projections of sea level rise, and then see all the possibilities. And to be honest, all of them are quite dire future. There's no scenario that shows that our community is not going to be affected. And then we accept it as a reality and try to invest on our local infrastructure in a way that makes us more prepared to deal with what's coming up in the next few decades. So I hope I answered the question as much as I can.
All right, thank you for that. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to weigh in on this, the balancing between the economic benefit of tourism and the environmental cost from our panel? Yeah, Barry?
I think some things to consider too is that will probably be a fair amount that is going to force our hand, particularly related to sea level rise, climate, the spread of infectious diseases, may in the end curtail the number of people that want to come here. So, there's, keeping that in mind, we should perhaps plan for, after the goose is no longer laying the golden egg, to get the head of the ball that we're not always going to have this economic strong leg of tourism supporting Charleston the way it has for the last 60, 70 years, and perhaps looking to diversifying our ways in ecologically and socially responsible ways economically for an alternative means of economic viability here.
Right, thank you. In the interest of time, I am going to move forward, but what I would like to suggest, there are still a number of questions in the chat that are well worth addressing. So perhaps if our current panelists wouldn't mind responding to them in the chat as we move forward, and then anything that does not get responded to, we'll try to save time for it at the end. But there's a lot of really important things to discuss as we move forward. So our next set of panelists, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Todd Levasseur, Dr. Dimitri Spyopoulos, and Dr. Scott Curtis. Our first presenter is Todd Levasseur. He's a visiting assistant professor at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Todd, feel free to share your slides. At the College of Charleston, he examines and studies the interface of cultural narratives and identities, with a specific focus on those in the domain we label religion, and how both these shape and are shaped by natural and more than human world. His work is thoroughly interdisciplinary while being comparative and historical in scope and method. He utilizes a variety of social, scientific, and humanistic research methods in engaging the overarching research question that guides his scholarly path. How can the human animal, from an individual to global scales, learn to actively generate just, resilient, regenerative, and sustainable behaviors and lifeways as we move forward through the Anthropocene, if at all? Administratively, he's involved with sustainability in higher education since 2016. He's directed the college's SAC CFC reaccreditation project, Sustainability Literacy as a Bridge to Addressing 21st Century Problems. This is a campus-wide effort to embed the triple bottom line, which is social, environmental, and economic systems, throughout the curricula through a variety of programming and trainings that he organized and managed and is managing. He is also a member of the Advisory Council of the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium and a fellow with the U.S. Partnership of Sustainable Development. And Todd, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks to my fellow panelists. Thanks. This is exciting. To my knowledge, one of the first times that the three MUSC, Citadel, and CFC have come together, let alone on this really important topic. I hope this is first of many times of us coming together as a community to really build resilience internally, because that's where we're going to have to go. I hope everybody can see my slide. I want to recognize I'm speaking from unceded Kuso Kiowa land sacred to those indigenous dwellers. And the views I'm going to present here are my own, based on my own layman's reading of aggregated climate trends I've been following for 25 years. Definitely don't expect agreement with where I'm going with this next few minutes, and expect even maybe some disagreement, but nonetheless, motivated, sorry, let me get back on, and sharing what I have to share, as a concerned human animal in a highly threatened bioregion that all data suggests will be underwater at some point, kind of no matter what's going to go on. So I take heart here from one of my heroes that we do need to speak the truth, no matter where that takes us. So that's what I'm going to try to do in this talk, and use the lens of the adaptive cycle. And so doing, for those of you not familiar, this is the adaptive cycle of resilience. Basically, this is how most all systems grow and go through what they are. They have an R phase, an exploitation growth phase, a conservation K phase, a release omega phase, and then an alpha reorganization phase, right? And this is ongoing. This is in our bodies. This can be social systems. This can be a relationship with somebody. This can be a mountain range. This could be the Gulf Stream, whatever it is, the universe itself. All systems in nature cycle through this, and therefore all social systems. And where I am right now with the climate data is that we're moving rapidly from a conservation phase of 10,000 years of agricultural revolution and then industrial revolution rapidly into a very different, warmer planetary phase that many are calling the Anthropocene. Important thing about the adaptive cycle is that it's nested, and I'll come back to revisit this at the end, but notice this is nested in over time and scale. So the larger in scale, the more overdeterminate that cycle is of those within it. The more global in scale, the more impacts local adaptive cycles. Keep that in mind, please, as I go through this. Quick primer on resilience. It's the ability of a system, right, an adaptive cycle, if you will, to bounce back to a steady state, to stay in that K phase, that conservation phase, and adapt to external shocks and disturbances. Such resilience requires adaptive flexibility and redundancies to keep from crossing thresholds into new regime shifts. So we need adaptive and robust social, economic, and environmental systems. And currently, Charleston / the Low Country is daily getting less resilient and more brittle. Thus, we're less adaptive economically, socially, and environmentally. In other words, we are not at all on a path of sustainability, and probably not really at all to deal with climate change, which is only going to amplify these pressures. Insight for one of my heroes, Aldo Leopold, wrote Sand County Almanac. He says, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. I think what we're living through is that we're not alone in seeing these wounds anymore, but rather all of us together are recognizing these wounds. Some of these wounds, though, are stochastic. Linearity is not the norm, right? Stochastic regime shifts are entirely possible. So here's some data points earlier this year of thin ice in parts they didn't think would be thin and thicker ice in parts they didn't think would be thick. But nonetheless, I'm going to speak here in the next few slides of just some trends over the last couple months. We need to be on this descent path, right, to stay under 2 degrees. We as a collective world are moving rapidly in this direction, which is, as we can imagine, not resilient or good. We also know we can't go over 2 degrees Celsius. I just saw Biden said he's going to pledge the US to have our emissions by 2030, I think, just today. Highly ambitious. We'll see if it happens. Nonetheless, we know we can't warm over 2 degrees baseline temperature as a planet, which means we only have about 565 gigatons of CO2 to go through. That number 2795 is how much those who are fossil fuel companies and petrostates said they are going to sell. And we've already gone through that budget some. So the math is kind of against us. And what that means to our plan is the rainfall patterns at the end of this century will look very different than the rainfall patterns aggregated at the beginning of this century, for example. It means that summer droughts in Europe are getting longer and more unprecedented. It means that vegetation is slowly actually becoming a carbon source rather than a sink, right? Not good things. These are symptoms of that adaptive cycle shift I was talking about. Okay, the warmer we go, the less vertebrates and animals are that are going to make it with us. We might even be closer to 1.5 degrees than we thought. Whole parts of Australia will be uninsurable. Wait until that starts kicking in here in the Low Country, right? In fact, during hearings in the Australian government, the insurance industry basically said we're accepting 2 degrees rise. This was after all the wildfires a few years ago, and then these floods just recently, right? So even insurance industry says we're going to hit 2 degrees, which means a lot of people are going to be fleeing the tropics. It's going to be inhospitable down there. Also means we're going to have longer, drier, hotter summers, up to 6 months of summer temperatures by 2100. This means we're going to have a lot less food. Also means glaciers are going to melt faster, thus speeding up all these cycles. Might mean the Atlantic Ocean shuts down. I remember these regime shifts are stochastic, nonlinear. It means more permafrost probably melting and therefore more continued heating. It suggests the Amazon actually might become a source rather than a sink as well. And in fact, we are at CO2 levels not seen in 3.6 million years. Coming back to some of the data shared earlier, these are sea level projections, right? 1 foot is about 30 centimeters. Charleston will be dealing with more and more water. This is, we know, to be happening. We see it in our own lived experience, right? So it's unavoidable. We need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. This requires a political will that I haven't seen yet in my lifetime, right? So this is something I think as a community, we need to be dialoguing with our elected leaders and saying carbon tax, I don't know, whatever it is to keep us from using more and more fossil fuels. The frustrating thing about all this is we've known for well over 100 years what burning coal does, right? The basic physics and chemistry of this has been clear for decades, right? None of this had to have happened, right? These wounds are entirely avoidable with some political will and the ability to care more deeper about the earth and those we share the earth with. There's still time for that, hopefully. What does this mean locally? I'm going to share here a passage from this great book, Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, which was a letter he wrote his son. Great passage in here that to me speaks to my experience living through all this and seeing what's going on in Charleston specifically. He writes, "Plunder has matured into habit and addiction. The people who could author the mechanized death of our ghettos, the mass rape of private prisons, then engineer their own forgetting, must inevitably plunder much more. Must inevitably plunder much more. This is not a belief in prophecy, but in the seductiveness of cheap gasoline. Once the dream's parameters were caged by technology and by the limits of horsepower and wind, but the dreamers have improved themselves, and the damming of seas for voltage, the extraction of coal, the transmuting of oil into food have enabled an expansion in plunder with no known precedent. And this revolution has freed the dreamers to plunder not just the bodies of humans, but the body of the earth itself. The earth is not our creation. It has no respect for us. It has no use for us. And its vengeance is not the fire in the cities, but the fire in the sky. Something more fierce than Marcus Garvey is riding on the whirlwind. Something more awful than all our African ancestors is rising with the seas. The two phenomena are known to each other. It was the cotton that passed through our chained hands that inaugurated this age. It is the flight from us that sent them sprawling into the subdivided woods. And the methods of transport through these new subdivisions, across the sprawls, the automobile, the noose around the neck of the earth, and ultimately the dreamers themselves. The noose around the neck of the earth, and ultimately the dreamers themselves. Right? Plunder has matured into habit and addiction. It's a plundering we are committed to daily in the Low Country, right? And it's going to come back to get us. We see this just in the last year alone, right? CO2 will steadily keep skyrocketing. And I don't know if it's something about the human animal ourselves, but all of you have probably seen that marshmallow test, right? Where little kids are given marshmallows and said, you're only allowed to have one, but if you don't eat it, you get two. Well, the cuttlefish is able to say no. So back to this, right? Charleston's going to be overdetermined by these larger trajectories. Okay, short term, we're going to be dealing with more and more flooding, as we know, and raising houses, building a seawall, right? Maybe even out in the harbor. Short term for some resilience to adapt to these. But this isn't just our problem. This is global at sea towns the world over, not just Charleston. And now we see that 10 feet is coming our way, probably no matter what we do. Who knows when, but it's kind of locked in with the Thwaites Glacier is now getting past. So long term, I think we need to be honest that our resilience planning is going to have to talk about relocating ourselves to either Charlotte or Columbia or other cities. Who knows when, but we need to be starting to have this discussion now if we're really going to be resilient. I want to end at, as a humanist, I come this way through the humanities. I want to suggest we probably need to cultivate new sensibilities, new affects, new ethics, new value systems based on non-anthropocentrism in interactions with the more than human world and with anti-racist, pro-equity principles when interacting with our fellow humans. At the very least, this prepares us emotionally for whatever's to come and hopefully ensures justice will be foregrounded as we adapt to a much warmer planet that will be full of climate refugees, including more than likely us fleeing the Low Country at some point in time.
Thank you for that very much. And remember, questions, just be sending them into the chat. So our next presenter is Dr. Sparopoulos from MUSC, and Dimitri, feel free to share your slides. So Dr. Sparopoulos is trained as a developmental biologist, and he started with working with the fruit fly. I'm not going to destroy or do injustice to the name of it. As a graduate student in the biolabs of Harvard and ensuing with postdoctoral work in genetically engineered mice at the Eccles Institute of Human Genetics at the University of Utah. Over the past 20 years, his research focus has been on the developmental origins of health and disease and he studies at the crossroads between genetics and endocrine disrupting chemical exposure, which over time has been becoming increasingly prominent in immune, reproductive, inflammatory, and neurological diseases and cancers in human wildlife. And please, Dimitri, please take it away.
Okay, great. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and expand this talk into going beyond greenhouse gases to show how we're kind of like a runaway train as far as the chemicals that we're synthesizing and putting into the environment to make our lives better, but actually causing a lot more problems. So
Dimitri, could you really quickly do the swap displays that we did last time?
Whoops.
There we go. No worries. All right, perfect.
Okay. All right. So can you see my cursor?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm going to start with Ernst Hackl, who in the 1860s, one thing he's noted for is translating Darwin's work into German, and he drew this tree of life to bring to exemplify what Darwin was talking about. But he and his students, he was an embryologist, and he and his students took sea urchin embryos, frog embryos, and here's a drawing of a jellyfish. He focused on jellyfish because of the complex body pattern, so more phenotype to follow. And what they did was, after fertilization and the first 3 symmetrical divisions, they broke apart the embryos into 8 individual blastomeres and grew 8 identical individuals. And in those, with those individuals, they actually studied climate change. What was the impact of temperature, acidification, salinity on these organisms? So this, you know, and this all took place, you know, in the mid 1800s. So this is the first example of what I would call modern embryology and climate change experiments on the organism. He coined the phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Well, people don't believe in that generally anymore because speciation causes, with speciation, we kind of cover our tracks, and so we look like we don't have similar origins during embryonic development. But everybody agrees that the early fetal development is very similar. Okay, so I started this work, my journey, in the biolabs of Harvard, and I rotated through 3 fruit fly labs. And what we were looking at were fundamental patterning genes that are shared with all metazoans. Those are organisms that have complex body patterns. So not just fruit flies, but all of these vertebrates and corals, etc. You could also say starfish. So the biolabs have a combination of biologists here and organismal and evolutionary biologists here. This is a picture from 20 years before I was there. And if you've heard of this thing called DNA, well, this guy, Jim Watson here, brought that to popularity. And if you've heard of DNA sequencing, this fellow here brought that to popularity. And Jim Watson's student, Mario Capecchi, brought performing experiments in animal model systems similar to the fruit fly to fruition. And 20 years after I left the biolabs, my first graduate student did experiments on the antennapedia gene in mice. And one important thing that she found was that steroid hormones change the expression of fundamental patterning genes within the embryo. So what we thought were hardwired programs of development shared across metazoa are actually open to impact by the environmental chemicals. So the idea there is that natural chemicals prepare the developing organism epigenetically to be adapted to the environment that it comes in. Well, now we have over 85,000 registered chemicals in the US, and only about 250 of those have been tested for their ability to impact embryonic development. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of the fetal chemical origins of disease. So most people are aware of DDT, an estrogenic hormone, and Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. Less well understood or known of is Minamata disease, which is a neurological disease found in children in Minamata, Japan. There was a chemical spill at a factory there, and mercury contamination occurred in the water supply. They tested the blood system of adults, and they found that the level of mercury was fine. It was not above dangerous levels, but what they didn't know was that mercury concentrates within the placenta, and that's what led to the neurological diseases in the offspring. Another example is the thalidomide, brought to prominence by Francis Kelsey. And, you know, the idea that thalidomide does not hurt adults, but it does cause birth defects in the fetus. And from the 40s to today, we have chemicals like DES, Makina, Doculax. These chemicals impact the embryo such that they're apparently normal, but develop obesity, diabetes, and rare cancers. Makina is used for early, it's to prevent premature births. And it's basically a form of progesterone, but that form of progesterone, instead of the normal half-life of 15 minutes in the bloodstream, has a half-life of 7 days. So if the pregnant woman gets doses every 7 days from mid-gestation, she's going to have a half-life of that progesterone carrying through. And then the last thing I'll point out here is that the Delaney Clause was repealed in 1996, and that was a clause that said carcinogens could not be in our foods, and now it's okay to have carcinogens in our food again. So the bottom line here is a distinction between classic and modern toxicology. And in classic toxicology, the dose, the effect, the response, and the dose are a linear relationship. But because of these fundamental patterning genes being impacted by very low doses of chemicals, you can have these dramatic changes in health of organisms at very low doses at much lower than toxic levels. Okay. So, and just to bring it to a local level, recently there was, so Laurel Island is, was the city dump, the landfill recycle center, and it's between Shipyard Creek, where the old naval vessels are housed, and Laurel and Newmarket Creek. And this is a very high, according to this study by people down at the Marine Labs, that it's arguably one of the most contaminated pieces of land in the Charleston area. And because of the pandemic, there was no public hearing, and a permit was granted to build homes, small businesses, and a ferry landing. I'd like to contrast that with the extinct great auk. Back in the 1600s, you could go down to Folly Beach or Isle of Palms or Sullivan's Island, and you would see these great auk wall to wall. Well, their meat was delicious and their pelt was highly desirable. And they also didn't know about predation, so you could walk right up to one of them, whack them on the head and get their meat and pelt. And so they're extinct now for that reason. So, but what I wanted to do was just give you an example of how one effect, obesity, is changing, has been changing over the last 20 or 30 years. And this progression doesn't even show the come up to current levels. You can see the percentage of the population obese or heavier keeps increasing over time. And so this is a trend not only seen in obesity, but in other health effects. So we're currently now at over 38% obese people. Cancers are on the rise, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, respiratory, lung diseases, gender, reproductive, immune, chronic inflammatory, and gut disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases. An interesting aside is that South Carolina is the US leader in Alzheimer's dementia-linked deaths. Okay, so how are we dealing with all of these diseases? Well, pharmaceuticals, more chemicals. So instead of taking away the chemicals that we're exposed to that cause these effects, we're giving pharmaceuticals that are trying to counteract those effects. Okay, and I'll finish with this historical perspective because I thought it was kind of nice to look at things from that. So life appeared on the planet about, between 4.1 and 3.7 billion years ago. And this is pretty accurate dating. So that's when early life appears. Interestingly, corals first appeared about 535 million years ago. Now, the first, or one of the arguably the greatest dying off extinction event, the Great Dying, the Permian Triassic extinction event, occurred about 251.9 million years ago, in which 81% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates died off. There was an 8° centigrade, 14° Fahrenheit rise in temperature, and the CO2 level in the atmosphere rose to above 2,000 parts per million, 415 today. And that great dying lasted for about 60,000 years. After that, the dinosaurs appeared, and they reigned for about 135 million years. So dinosaurs being vertebrates. And they were dominant between the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, 201.3 million years ago, and the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, 66 million years ago. Early humans didn't appear on the scene until about 196 to 300,000 years ago. And the earliest signs of the human lineage is 77 million years ago. We entered the Holocene epoch about 11,650 years ago, which is arguably the most stable interglacial climate period. But the Holocene extinction is predicted to occur, the 6th extinction, and our current rates of extinction are about 100 to 1,000 times greater than previously observed in these other extinction events. In about 5 billion years, our sun will expand and render the Earth uninhabitable. So we're about halfway through in the life of life on the planet. And it's interesting that corals, with the great dying off of corals nowadays, the question is whether they will survive through this next extinction event. So with that, I'll stop my slides.
Thank you very much for that. And our last panelist, Dr. Scott Curtis, is from the Citadel. And then, yep, Scott, if you want to go ahead and share your slides. Dr. Curtis is the John Lining Professor of Physics and the inaugural director of the Lieutenant Colonel James B. Neer Jr. Center for Climate Studies at the Citadel. One theme proposed for the center is the relationship between the Earth's climate and national security. He came to the Citadel in 2020 from East Carolina University in North Carolina, where he was the titled Distinguished Professor of the Natural Sciences and Mathematics. During his time at ECU, he acquired close to $1.4 million in grants and fellowships. His research centers on climate change, precipitation, and storms, and how they affect coastal communities. His primary research interests include characterizing the causes and impacts of flooding, coastal storms, drought, and precipitation extremes. He's also interested in the interactions between weather hazards and society, with fieldwork in Eastern North Carolina, Jamaica, and Bangladesh. He earned his PhD and Master's of Science in both Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences from the University of Wisconsin, and he holds a bachelor's degree in Environmental Science from the University of Virginia. Some of his distinctions include the Center for Sustainability Outstanding Affiliate Faculty Member, 5-year Achievement Award for Excellence in Research and Creative Activity, and the Southeastern Division of the Association of American Geographers Research Award. Teaches courses in climate, weather, and atmospheric sciences, and he's authored close to 100 books, book chapters, peer-reviewed journal articles, and conference proceedings. Scott, go ahead and take it away. I think you might be muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
There. There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No. Yeah, we got you.
Back. So we're all good now?
Yes,
Alright.
we can hear you and see your screen.
All right, thanks, Jen. Thanks for this, organizing this panel. I think it's been great so far, and I'm going to try to run through this rather quickly. But I just wanted to kind of give a brief overview of managing connected climate extremes and how this is a challenge of spaces. My talk can pretty much be summarized by signs you see all over our campus. You can ask Dr. Batuli and Dr. Gooseby here that at high tide and heavy rainfalls, this area floods. So what I'm going to be talking about are this kind of combination or connection between hazards, in this case, tidal flooding and pluvial flooding or rainfall flooding. And then the other part of this sign that's kind of related to my topic is the area. So what are the spaces that we need to be concerned about? And when I'm talking about spaces, it's both temporal and geographic kind of space. So, all right. Okay, so this came out as the All Hazards Vulnerability and Risk Assessment prepared for the city of Charleston back in November of 2020. And these are all different types of hazards: flooding, sea level rise, earthquakes, extreme heat, water shortage, and hazmat. But a lot of times we don't think about how these things combine or intersect. And the obvious one is flooding and sea level rise. And it's already been said that these two things are increasing and they're projected to increase over time. We consider this a compound event. And so rather than looking at these hazards as either or, we need to start looking at them as and, because the combination of these and the compounding is going to increase over time as well.
Scott, you're not sharing your slides. I mean, you're sharing them, but you're not in presenter mode. So we're not seeing you moving forward in your slides. We're just seeing the first slide. Can you go to slideshow and then just present?
Yeah, let me try that again. I apologize. This has happened before. I don't know why it does this.
Or you can not, just make sure you're forwarding through. We were still on your initial screen. I mean, that's fine if you can't share, but you had just stayed on the first one and I think verbally had moved on.
All right, let me go ahead and try this again. All right, share screen. Is this any better?
It's still,
Just click on go to the bottom right and you can click on presentation mode. So the bottom of your PowerPoint screen.
Is this working? Is it going through now?
no.
It's not.
No, so one thing you could do is just go from slide to slide manually, and we'll still be able to see it. You're just not in presenter mode.
Yeah, on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so if you just go down the slides, pick them one at a time.
All right. Well, I apologize for that. So you're able to see it this way?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
now
that's
we're on
perfect.
slide 2. No worries. No, everything's fine. We're on
Yeah,
slide
I
10.
apologize. This has happened before. I don't know. I still got to figure out my whole screen situation.
So yeah, you can just do
Oh,
that.
wait, maybe now this will work. I've got a green light now, so this hasn't changed at all. Still,
No,
you're just seeing the slides.
Yep.
Okay, well, we'll press on then. So everyone can see this one about the compound climate events.
yes.
Correct.
All right, I apologize for all this technical difficulty. So essentially what a compound climate event is multiple drivers or hazards that contribute to environmental or societal risk. And there's many climate drivers. I won't go through them all. And as I mentioned before, there's many flood hazards, river flow, precipitation, tide, surge waves, sea level rise, they all combine. And the combination is much more impactful than any individual hazard. And so we know what is to study, we know the problem, but we still need to understand the when, the where, and the why. So this is where the spaces come in, like I was saying, not only the physical space, but also the when. And so there's 4 different types of compound climate events that we want to think about that have been kind of made into a typology. One is multivariate, multiple drivers or hazards leading to an impact. One is preconditioned, where weather-driven or climate-driven preconditioned events aggravate the impacts of a hazard. Temporally compounding, where a succession of hazards leads to an impact. And spatially compounding, where hazards in multiple connected locations cause an aggregate impact. So it's really the temporal and spatial nature that gets into this idea of spaces I was mentioning before. So when we think about a compound climate event, we can look at it again in terms of temporal and spatial scales in a figure like this. And where we have the physical event, the pluvial and fluvial flooding, it has its own spatial and temporal scale, which is usually extended because of the combination of the hazards. And then we have the decision space. So we have the physical space, we have the decision space. And these are often not aligned. The decision space is based on technical capability, cultural and political capital, and financial or geographic size. And in this case, in this Actor 1, the author suggests that this would be similar to a small city with a limited budget. And so this Charleston would be an example of this. So so the idea is for planning optimization for multivariate or sequential connected extremes, which is difficult to do. And then we can extend this even further and talk about the combination of flooding and extreme heat. So there's this other and we have to consider as well. And I think this was also mentioned by Dr. Pierce in the first in the first panel presentation, that heat is something that we also have to need to be concerned about. And there's been recent studies just in the past couple of years about how this is a compounded hazard event. The fact that you have heat and pluvial flooding together. This is a study done in the upper Midwest, looking at flood occurrences, both minor, moderate, and major floods. And when they had both large values in CAPE, and CAPE just stands for the available potential energy for convection. So it just gives a sense of how easily it is for thunderstorms to form and for heavy rainfall. And then we have sensible heat, which is temperature, and then specific humidity, which is obviously humidity. And there is a geospatial relationship between flood events and these heat measures, which makes sense. It says down here that CAPE is a major factor for stormy weather, and It's not just limited to this area, though. They suggest that this could be far-reaching and it's worth study for coastal areas like Charleston as well. And with this, the potential of impacts of heat stress followed by flooding can lead to overwhelming the current infrastructure, similar to what Dr. Batuli said earlier in his remarks. So damaged roads, hospitals, and power grid. So again, we don't have to go very far to see this happening here in Charleston. So we go back to September of last year. Post and Courier had a couple of stories pretty much back to back. On September 21st, there was a king tide event where we had flooding over 8 feet of water. On September 25th, just 4 days later, there was a rain bomb inside the city that led to some areas received over 3 inches of rainfall within a day. And then, interestingly enough, just the following day on September 26th, now this wasn't a precursor heat event, but actually that was a yellow flag day, almost a red flag day in terms of heat health stress that followed. So 87 degrees Fahrenheit as far as the wet bulb globe temperature goes, puts that in the yellow flag zone. Again, that's wet bulb globe temperature just gives a sense of how people feel and respond to heat. So it was almost red flag day. So, and when we have this combination of standing water and heat, this is conducive to health hazards with the growth of bacteria and microorganisms within the water. So I wanted to conclude, like I said, I wasn't going to take a whole lot of time, and it would have been even shorter if I didn't have technical difficulties, but I just wanted to introduce a couple of heat health studies that are going on this summer in Charleston. This is a collaboration of many different folks, and I just wanted to introduce this to y'all. One is a single day citizen science heat mapping study that's going to happen in Charleston. This is funded by NOAA, and basically it's just to receive equipment to put on cars, as you see in that picture there. And then Houston did it last year, and they covered a lot of area. That each of those little pieces of puzzle you see for Houston, Texas, is a route that someone would drive and measure heat, and then both the temperature and humidity, and then this group that works under NOAA creates these maps, these GIS maps of heat index. So, and then a second project that's going to happen that's more related to heat health is going to take place at MUSC and the Charleston Medical District, and also the campus of the Citadel, and with outdoor workers. And the outdoor workers are going to have eye buttons and watches to monitor the heat and heart rate that they're experiencing during their work weeks. And also we'll be looking at wet bulb globe temperature with this project as well. So just a last plug for the Charleston Heat Watch. Here are the partners that are involved in this. The lead is really the city of Charleston and the climate adaptation partners. And if anyone's interested more about this, they can contact me directly or contact the lead PI, Janice Barnes here. So with that, I will stop sharing and excuse myself for my technical difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curtis. And unfortunately, we've eaten our way through our Q&A, but that's okay, because one, we are filming this and we will share the link with everyone who's registered, and that includes the Q&A. If you put questions in the chat, we will work together as a panel to provide some responses to people. So no worries if we can't get the questions answered, but I do want to make sure we save time for our final panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and just move straight into our third panel, and we're going to start with a presentation from Dr. Jay Goolsbee-Smith, who's with the Citadel. And Dr. Smith is an associate professor of leadership, associate professor of management, an assistant provost of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a director of the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Center at the Citadel. She currently serves in her second year as honorary commander at the Joint Base Charleston, Assigned Time Naval Information Atlantic Warfare Center. She serves on the boards of the Sophia Institute Social Justice Racial Equity Collaborative, the Charleston Interreligious Council, and the Children's Trust South Carolina. Dr. Smith holds a PhD and an MBA in organizational behavior from Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management, and a BS in computer science from Spelman College. Her teaching, research, service, and practice center on the intersections of diversity, inclusion, and spirituality as it applies to higher education, military, corporate, and faith-based spaces. Smith is the co-author of Beyond Inclusion in 2014, co-editor of Blessed Are Those Who Ask the Questions. I wish that my students knew that. That's forthcoming, and several journal articles. She's a member of the Academy of Management, PhD project, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, American Mensa, and the Greater St. Luke AME Church, where she's held a variety of elected and appointed leadership positions. And please, Jay, you can go ahead and share your slides.
As all of that essentially said, I am not a scientist. I am a person who deals with people and deals with social issues. And toward that end, I will not be sharing slides. I merely wanted to speak to you. And as I looked at the different research that everyone is doing, and as I read up on resilience and on national disasters, and a lot of people mentioned this in their presentations, the linkages between social injustice and poverty are absolutely staggering. From this non-scientist's look at it, you know, you look at the natural disasters and the things that happen. And I remember looking at the coverage of Hurricane Katrina, and people were saying from their purchase of privilege, saying, you know, why didn't the people go? You know, they warned them, they saw the storm coming. And so, you know, when you look at economics, there are people who are realizing that if they don't work, they're not going to be able to pay their rent. There's also an assumption that you have the money to go. Even as a college professor several years ago, when we had that 100 Years Madness, that was my first fall in Charleston. And I said, oh my goodness. And other hurricanes that followed. And, you know, friends were calling from all over the country saying, why aren't you evacuating? And so while some of those reasons are definitely economic, I had with me at the time a multi-generational household, which is what many families have. And I had an 80-something-year-old dad that had dementia. I had a huge 88-pound dog. I had a 32-year-old son, and I had an 11-year-old daughter, and I had me. And so the wherewithal to be able to get all those hotel rooms that accept dogs and do those things. So there are a lot of economic reasons why these disasters particularly hit people in multi-generational households. Also, the fact of health conditions. Many times you have in these multi-generational homes health conditions where people really can't really react very much. And also with the economic disparity, many times they don't have the capacity to do the things to the house that would help it to be able to withstand the disaster. So to be able to make the repairs, and if they're renting in those situations that Dr. Batuli talked about the sort of, I call it predatory renting of these flood prone properties to people for cheaper. Not only might they not have the money to fix those things, but as a renter, there's certain things you cannot do for capital improvements. And then all of this kind of adds up to a lower resilience to the disaster. And so there's oftentimes a saying that says when America gets a cold, many populations get the flu. This is one of those situations where we are all in trouble, clearly with the global warming and the flood lines, you know, coming up and whatnot. But this is really particularly disastrous. And interestingly, I think that the social end of the solutions that we need to have need to come at many, many different levels. You know, you've got the individual level where we need to educate, but it's not just educating, because when you're in that disenfranchised situation, you think back to those of you that have had psychology, Maslow's hierarchy, it talks about, you know, your physical safety, you got to have food, and you got to have a safe place to stay. All this talk about disasters and the temperature going up and all of this is so far away. And those are types of things that a person would think about when they're getting toward that self-actualization zone, that the education sometimes can even fall on deaf ears. Mary Coaster, and I know I said your last name wrong, but she's doing such phenomenal work that is looking at trying to disrupt this lack of education by talking with children and integrating with arts and getting them involved. And I really do think that kids are going to be the hope of trying to get families to comply. You even think about things like recycling, which can help, to decrease the global warming. But again, if you're struggling to eat and you're in these different situations, you're not thinking about if you're going to recycle. You're thinking about how are you going to eat? So even getting people to comply and do the things that we can use the paper bags and do the recycling, and it's almost falls on deaf ears, but it's not for lack of education in the intellectual sense. It's a sense of hopelessness that exists. And so I think that some of the solutions that we need to integrate at different levels, whether it's individual or the family level, is very important. But also I think with looking at the culture and looking at the cultures of disenfranchised communities, which has to do, of course, like I said, with Mary's work on schools and art, but it also has to do with our churches. This is the holy city. And so to the extent that you can get places of worship to really understand these issues, get behind them, lobby for laws that will help to do the infrastructure changes, lobby to raise money to be able to make some of the changes, that will help as well. And so from my social standpoint, increasing the levels of equity and economic equity between different parts of the population are extremely important, because you start to move up that Maslow's hierarchy, the more funds you have. Also, a lot of times I think that people who are in the crosshairs of this are oftentimes distrustful of systems and distrustful of the science, because that very system is the one that has allowed them to be so very disenfranchised. So now, why do you trust a system that says you have to recycle and you have to use all these different types of bags? Also, I think the fact of having communication in such a way that it can be acted upon, because again, it can be so overwhelming and hopeless to hear all of this information and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be here. So it kind of adds more to that carpe diem mindset. And we've got enough people that are in that mindset. And probably the biggest disruptive thing that I think we need to do is to change the self-talk. Dr. Batuli, I heard in his presentation, talked about decision-making factors and getting people to do things. And then one of my concerns is the gentrification. You know, we talk about the different walls that need to get built, and we talk about all these different structural things, of which I am wholly ignorant. But I wonder if the raising elevation and all these infrastructure changes will happen more quickly with the so-called gentrification, where people have more tax dollars. Because if they're in poor neighborhoods that don't have the tax dollars, and if these things are funded by tax dollars, then where does it leave the poorest areas? And then we have the cycle of people moving in, and then the tax dollars go up because there's more funds to be used. Does that just push the very disenfranchised people further north, I guess, in this case of Charleston, because they're not going to be able to go east? And then when you go further north, now you're starting to touch even more of the Superfund sites from the dumping and the toxicity. And so my concern is that we don't replicate a new problem. And so looking at it from a social end, I just kind of leave us with the question of what do we do with, as Howard Thurman calls, the disinherited. So that's kind of the vantage point that I'm on.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. So moving to our next panelist, Dr. Kate Malay. Kate, do you have slides that you want to share?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I'll get them up here.
So Dr. Malay got her PhD in analytic chemistry. So we've had such a diversity, such a range of expertise with us today. From the University of Delaware in 2009, and was a postdoc in the Marine and Atmospheric Chemistry Research Lab in the University of North Carolina, Wilmington until 2012. After teaching for 2 years at Elon University, she joined the faculty of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the College of Charleston in 2014. She conducts research in the field of environmental nanotechnology, investigating both environmental risks and benefits that may arise from a rapidly growing field of nanotechnology. She publishes this work in peer-reviewed journals with undergraduate students as co-authors. She currently teaches general chemistry, analytic chemistry, environmental chemistry, and this semester taught an honors colloquia class that I heard a lot about called The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We? Kate, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I was a little hesitant, honestly, at first, because I thought, what could I bring to the table? But, you know, I've been reflecting a lot about my experiences in teaching around sustainability issues. And so I thought maybe I could bring some perspectives from my experience and kind of expand upon how we might shape our teaching. So as Dr. Wright said in the introduction, I teach general chemistry. I usually teach this for non-science majors, and I teach analytical chemistry for art chemistry and marine biology majors. And I also teach environmental chemistry. These are upper level students that are often bound for PhD programs in chemistry or some related field. And so I see a really wide range of different students in the course of my teaching. And in all of my teaching, I have some aspect of sustainability and some consciousness about the environment. And something that I've noticed occurring, and we can see why, you know, because the situation is so dire, is I see more and more the emergence of this sort of point of view that we're screwed, and that, you know, nothing we can do matters, that the world is just ending up and headed for disaster, and we shouldn't even bother trying to fix these problems because we're so far down this path. We're like a lost cause. And, you know, whenever we study climate, we think about feedback loops. And I think about this as a feedback loop of, as we further see inaction on a lot of these issues, both locally and globally, you know, there's a tendency to just reinforce this this mode of thinking. And I really wanted to investigate, you know, how can I get around thinking about things this way? And, you know, whenever I teach environmental chemistry, I'm teaching about other aspects of the environment aside from climate. And if you dig back, and you don't have to dig back very far, but there are some success stories to be told. And I think that it's important that we bring those into the conversation too. I think that climate change is certainly a special kind of a problem, which I'll talk about here in a minute, but briefly just kind of show some of the things that I like to share with my students. And so what I have shown on this slide here is a visualization from NASA showing on the left sort of how we can expect different ozone, stratospheric ozone concentration for the ozone layer to really restore itself over, you know, maybe not our lifetimes, but the lifetime of our students. You know, we can expect the ozone layer to almost reach back to and restore itself back to its natural levels because of the international agreement and cooperation that we have through the Montreal Protocol. Whereas in the absence of that, or if we don't stay true to those commitments, we can see ourselves, you know, the depletion of the ozone layer spanning out over the globe, away from even the poles where it's currently the most significant. And I love to share this story with students because I think it's a great example of a big environmental problem that even before people were 100% sure that reining in the use of things like chlorofluorocarbons would necessarily solve the problem, we were able to achieve an international agreement that you know, we can see some real measurable impacts of today. And it took a long time, several years, to actually see that the Montreal Protocol was actually working the way it was intended to. But I think it's a really promising story because it is something that has to take place on an international level. Whoops, need to get to my next slide here. Okay, and so other environmental wins, you know, we can talk about within the US. Although we certainly have the problem of emerging contaminants, like an earlier speaker talked about, is definitely a problem that we need to keep our eye on to keep those industries accountable. There are other cases of known pollutants in the case of air quality, in which we've seen our air quality improve remarkably over the last 40 years. And so These are just some graphs from the EPA showing over the past about 40 years how we've seen things like carbon monoxide and nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. These are things that contribute to smog, that contribute to acid rain. All of these things, because of environmental regulation, has been, have started to come down in a really meaningful way that has improved the quality of life for people. And so, we bring these stories to the forefront just to show students that it is possible to have positive change, that it is possible to have regulations informed by science in a way that can have productive outcomes for us. But we also need to acknowledge that that climate change can be a bit of a different beast. This is just a graph kind of showing that if we kind of accumulate all of these different air pollutants that we can see over that same time span, this decrease in air pollution, at least as far as these particular pollutants, was occurring at a time of intense growth in this country in terms of population, our lifestyle involving more driving and more energy use, as well as an increase in GDP. And so we don't have the negative environmental impacts, but layered on top of that is we're seeing a decrease in pollution in the context of a growing economy. And we can certainly talk about whether or not, how we might see climate fit into this. We have CO2 emissions over this time, though, have continued to increase. And so I really like to use this article written by Bill McKibben. It was written over 25 years ago in the New York Times, but it really kind of sets up this context of this conversation of, carbon monoxide versus carbon dioxide. So of course I like it because it has this chemistry theme to it, but I think that comparing these two molecules can actually give us some insight into what is different about climate change and global warming relative to other forms of pollution that we have previously successfully tackled. So both carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, they primarily come from the same thing. It's the combustion of fossil fuels. In the case of carbon monoxide, it's just that incomplete combustion. We don't get all the way oxidized to carbon dioxide. And then carbon dioxide is the complete combustion product from fossil fuels. And so we've seen, as I showed in the previous slide, a significant decrease in carbon monoxide emissions in the US in recent years, owing to things like catalytic converters that ensure that combustion goes to completion. But over that same time period, we've seen an increase in carbon dioxide as we've relied more and more on fossil fuels. And so, if you just focus on carbon monoxide and think about everything through that lens, you would consider this a success story. You would say that we're on the right track. And that all that we really needed to do is make this one small tweak. We just had to sort of take that car engine and get that catalytic converter in there. And we just need to sort of technologically advance our way out of this. But I think whenever we look at CO2, the problem is that CO2 is what an internal combustion engine is designed to produce. And so if we're saying the problem is the production of CO2, then we have to start to ask ourselves, the problem is not some tiny flaw in the car's engine. The problem is the existence of the car itself. And so this sort of reframes our scope as far as how we think about climate change and recognize that it's a much broader problem than previous forms of environmental pollution. And so we have a lot of work to do. And whenever I look at all of the data that we are constantly bombarded with, all of these news stories about why we're headed down this wrong path, and it's so frustrating to look at it as sometimes we feel like outsiders thinking, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we getting in front of this problem? And so I really got interested in this question and really decided to dive into it by teaching a class. And so I taught a class this semester called The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We? Trying to investigate really, what is it about our society? What is it about our economy? What is it about our different social networks that make it really hard for us to get out in front of this problem in a way that's different than our past environmental challenges? And so I've relied heavily on using systems thinking in my teaching. and to try to get people to look at things through a different lens and look at things more holistically, not looking at things just as a chemistry problem, but thinking about all of the other factors that will really influence our behavior and how our food and energy systems function. And so two of the books that I used were All We Can Save as an anthology of essays written by climate feminists, so that we sort of center previously marginalized voices into this space so that we can really hear from people that previously have not had a platform to speak. We've also used Project Drawdown, which is a great resource, and just really kind of shift our focus away from all of these problems and focus them into solutions. You know, in a big part of my class is also taking the solutions and recognizing the co-benefits that come along with those. And so we can, and so more and more as you know, I've kind of gone through teaching this class, I've started to really look at climate change, not so much as the problem itself, but more as a symptom of a larger problem in all of the various forms of inequities that, that we see around the world. And so I wanted to share a couple tools that I like to use to kind of help complement my teaching and my more solutions-oriented teaching and focus around this space. And so one of the tools that I've grown to really appreciate is this. This is called an En-ROADS Climate Solution Simulator. And basically it's a worldwide model that's just meant to give you the 30,000 foot view as to, you know, how different changes may be implemented on a global scale, and see what potential impacts that could have. And so what we can do is start to help students envision what this world would look like if we're going to imagine a world that gets close to, stays within that 2 degrees Celsius that we hope to achieve by the year 2100. And I think there's lots of take homes from this. One is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one single thing that we can do to solve this problem. And so that's one thing to take away from this exercise, so students can kind of build their own scenario. But another thing is also that it is possible. It is going to be hard work. It's going to be a huge transformation. This is going to require huge periods of transformation, but that it is possible. And that's something that students oftentimes, that's a message that students oftentimes unfortunately don't hear. And then another tool that I also got from the same group, Climate Interactive, is this thing called a multi-solving flower. And I really like this as a tool whenever we think about climate solutions, because as I said, it helps us focus on these co-benefits that exist. You know, so if we're going to maybe propose more bike lanes in Charleston as a climate solution, you know, we also need to think about what are the other co-benefits. This might give people more mobility so that they have more access to job opportunities. It's going to be a form of exercise. It's going to improve their overall health. It might be an opportunity to connect more with your community rather than all being isolated in individual cars. And so whenever you take that sort of a broader approach, this multi-solving flower is a really useful tool, I think, to help us sort of tease apart all these different co-benefits and really take a holistic view. You know, a lot of times whenever we're talking about addressing climate change, the focus is on what we're giving up. But I think that there's a lot to be gained, especially for traditionally marginalized communities. And so, so the flower also asks you to kind of think about how different proposals are, you know, going to be impacting different groups. You know, if we're proposing electric cars, that's probably only going to be beneficial for a group that's already well off. But if we can propose something that is a little bit more accessible, like more access to bikes and bike lanes, then that becomes a mode of transportation that is a lot more a more equity-centered solution. And so, so those are just some tools that I've used and sort of how my thinking has changed over the course of the last few years as I've taught more and more in this space. And so, you know, some of my takeaways would be, you know, make sure you lift up those co-benefits whenever we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about it formally with a class or maybe informally, and that there's no silver bullets. We have to all kind of be participants in this process. This is an all hands on deck situation. And I think it's been very humbling for me as a scientist too, to learn more and more about these different aspects of how all of these different systems intersect with each other, because I recognize now that that we really a lot of our solutions are not so much technological, it's more social, it's more economic, it's more about social justice. And so this work is going to be hard, but it's also potentially really beautiful, and it's really empowering. And so I just wanted to hopefully interject some grounded positivity into this space, and hopefully we can help our students sort of shape their ideas around climate solutions. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for the invitation to participate here.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we are going to move right into our last but not least presentation from Christine von Kolnitz from MUSC. So Christine, if you've got slides to share, please feel free. Christine is a sustainability manager for MUSC. She is an accredited commercial energy manager and a South Carolina DHEC certified recycling professional. Upon graduating with a BA from the College of Charleston in '92, she worked as the recycling coordinator for the college, and while there, she was instrumental in establishing the South Carolina DHEC Collegiate Recycling Grant Program. She became the first recycling coordinator for MUSC in '95, the first sustainability manager in 2005, and she's currently a member of the City of Charleston's Climate Action Plan Committee. She's been a member of the Charleston Medical District Advisory Group support team working on resiliency since 2019. She's been invited to help create the updated South Carolina Energy Efficiency Roadmap and chair the nonprofit and public entities working group. She was appointed by the City of Charleston Resiliency and Sustainability Advisory Committee, where she's still a member, and she was appointed to the Charleston City's Green Committee in 2007 and served as the chair of the Recycling and Solid Waste Subcommittee from 2012. So lots of local knowledge here. She was a graphic designer and editor of a book called Slavery to Civil Rights, a walking tour of African-American Charleston. And in 2004, she co-wrote a recycling book titled Recycling and Beyond, a College Campus Primer. And she's a member of the board of the MUSC Arboretum, a Clemson Extension Waste Manager Educator, and the current chair of the Robert Luntz Group Sierra Club. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Just want to double check that.
Yep, you're live.
Great, thank you.
Yes,
All
but
right.
you might need to swap your display because right now we're seeing the presenter version.
Ah, great, thank you.
Perfect.
Great, thank you for letting me know that. All right, so I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for getting these three institutions together. I think that great things will follow just from us talking today, and the work that we are doing together, piecemeal here and there has already been showing fruit. As Dr. Curtis was saying, with the heat research that's coming up, and the climate action plan with the City of Charleston, and so many other things. So what I want to talk about today is, what does resilience in Charleston look like? What have we been doing? I'm just going to show high level some of the things that these three institutions and the City of Charleston have been doing to make their institutions more resilient through mitigation and adaptation. And one of the things that has been alluded to through the other discussions is culture change. That is, if you're a sustainability manager, your job basically boils down to culture change. You really need to have the entire institution on board with what you're doing. And if it is recycling, you're the sustainability manager, you can't recycle every can on campus or in the institution. You have to have people do that. So yeah, just like Dr. Goolsby was saying, yes, we've got to change the culture, and we've got to work with people where they are as well to do that. And these institutions, when we're mitigating and trying to adapt to our circumstances. It's we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. So these are very difficult circumstances that we are faced with, and we are doing a lot to face them. And we're doing what we can to reduce our use of fossil fuels, and we'll show that. So the Citadel. The Citadel is working on mitigation through one way here, dining trays. They're not using them at all in their cafeteria, and that reduces, we're talking about the co-benefits a minute ago. Here's some co-benefits. We're reducing water, detergent use, energy, and food waste, all with that one simple, low-tech, solution of just not using a tray. So, we can go from very high tech to very, no tech. And they're also, during the summer season, it's another mitigation here of not using energy. Their buildings are closed on Fridays. They're reducing the energy that they're using for air conditioner and lighting. And on the adaptation side, they're growing crops in a controlled indoor farm setting. And they're doing this because, in the future, we will have inundated properties and inundated farmland. So where are we going to grow our food? So this is an adaptation. And their American Society of Civil Engineers has adopted drains on their campus. And they clean those drains out to make sure that the floodwaters can go away after a flood. The College of Charleston, they're doing a lot as well on the mitigation side. You can see this picture here. They've got some solar film, and they've put that on a historic structure. There was a lot of discussion about whether that could be possible, but you see here how they've made it possible. And they actually, if you look up, you can almost think that that's still the historic roof that you're looking at. It's creating a third of the energy needed to operate that particular building. Then they've got centers. They've got a low country hazard center. That center works on researching and developing and creating solutions to resilience. And on the adaptation side, you can see here, they've got this is one of their large cisterns, and they've got several around their campus. They can hold over 4,000 gallons of rain. So that is an adaptation that is helping their buildings be more resilient. And they also have a Center for Resilience Excellence, and that is working with collaborators at the college, the county, and the aquarium. So the Medical University of South Carolina, we are, of course, we're like the Citadel. We're next to the Ashley River, so we're getting a lot of flooding on our campus. And some of the things that we're doing, we're reducing energy use. We're on our second performance contract. We're spending over $30 million, but we'll save over almost $3 million a year. And we'll save all those electrons from being used in the first place. That is, number one right there. And then you can see this long line of employees getting onto this CARTA bus. We have over 1,000 employees a day that use public transportation, and that is free for them to use. The university is paying for that. And we're also a major supporter of the Holy Spokes Bike Share program that you can find around town. All of our employees can use those bikes for free. And I've seen employees get off the bus and get right on one of these bikes. So, they're, getting co-benefits from all of these. They don't have to be stressed out driving home. And when they're riding the bikes, they get those wellness benefits. So on the adaptation side, the MUSC is purchasing, you can see this high water vehicle. When we have major hurricanes and major flooding, we still need to, move doctors out and move move doctors and nurses out and move doctors and nurses in who are arrested. So, you know, when you're working in a hospital over 24 hours, that relief is huge. So we bought 2 of these vehicles to be able to bring in relief staff if necessary. And we also have boats to move people around our campus if necessary. And we have used them in the past during hurricanes. And we elevate a lot of equipment across our campus. We have been awarded a FEMA best practice for that as a matter of fact. And finally, the city of Charleston. They have been working nonstop recently on their climate action plan, and that I understand is going to go in front of the city council on May 11th. So please look for that. The climate action plan focuses on everything from transportation to education and buildings and waste. So many solutions in that plan, and it's a 5-year plan. So the city is going to be working that over the next 5 years, and they've already done a lot of work on city facilities themselves. They're saving over 175,000 tons of carbon dioxide, and they're saving money too. So here again, we've got these co-benefits of reducing fossil fuel consumption. And then you can see here down at the battery, the low battery seawall was repaired. They added 2 feet in height there. So, you know, we're adapting and trying to prevent the catastrophic floods that have been happening in this area of our town. They've also, you know, we've all heard about the seawall, but they also put in a new outfall at Ashley Boulevard. And they also increased the size of a pipe from 12 inches to 36 inches near Trad Street. And they also put in over 1,000 feet of storm drain. So those are the things that, you know, weren't the headline, but they're very important. And they've been doing these types of projects all over the city. West Ashley, Johns Island, and yes, James Island. So they're working on projects in all different areas to help with flooding and draining those floods. And their flooding and sea level rise strategy is where you can see their plan for all of these projects. So I hope you get some great feelings about, you know, all of this activity that's going on in the city of Charleston. You know, we're all working very hard to really mitigate and adapt to at the same time these flooding issues. And Dr. Curtis talked about the heat, and we're working on research for that too. And you know, we're all planting trees to adapt to that as well and mitigate that. So, you know, there's so many projects. I wish I could tell you all of them, but with the limited time today, that's about it. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much. So we are technically over time, but I think that if there are some burning questions that people would like to ask, maybe you could go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask. And Christine, if you could maybe stop sharing your slides so we can see everybody in the gallery. Excellent. In the time that we have left, actually, we don't really have any time left, but are there any burning questions that anyone would like to ask our panelists while we're still on the call? I'm not hearing or seeing any. So we've got some questions that are in the chat. I will be working with panelists to get some responses. This is also being recorded, so I will make sure that a copy of this goes out to everyone who registered, along with the resources that have been shared in the chat, and we all really appreciate you being here with us to hear from all this expertise. Lots of things to think about, and hopefully we ended on a positive note of some good things that are currently happening. Thanks so much for being here.
Happy Earth Day.
Yeah, happy Earth Day. Every day is an Earth
Thanks.
Day.
Thank you.